St. Josemaria Scriva, he once said that get used to lifting your heart to God in acts of thanksgiving many times a day, because he gives you this and that, because you have been despised, because you haven't what you need, or because you have. Thank him for everything, because everything is good. Everything is good. I think if we tried saying that to the lepers in our gospel today, they would disagree with us. Their disease made them outcasts in society. They lived outside the towns and they weren't allowed to participate in public worship. And if they came around others, they had to notify them in some way that they had leprosy. Usually they'd have like a bell around them or they'd have a clapper. And you can imagine, based on this, that they lived a pretty lonely life. And it's hard to see any good that could come from their disease. In our gospel, they wanted to be rid of it. They begged Jesus from a distance to heal them. But most of the lepers in this story, they behaved differently than Naaman in our first reading. If you remember the story of Naaman, he traveled to visit Elijah because he heard good things about him. He asked Elijah for healing from his leprosy, and he was told to go bathe in the river Jordan. At first, he was skeptical. He doubted the power of God because he was looking for a great display of power. But after his servants convinced him to go and bathe in the river, his skepticism was put to rest because he was healed. Now, Naaman, he could have immediately returned home after that, but he first returns to Elijah to give thanks. Today we heard Elijah refuse to accept his gift, which at first sight it seems kind of strange, but by refusing his gift, he's in effect telling him that it wasn't I who healed you, but it was God. And Naaman, he comes to realize this, and he gives up the worship of his false gods to worship the one true God. And we see a change in Naaman's life. He doesn't just settle with that physical healing, but there's a spiritual growth taking place when he turns to Elijah to give thanks to God. Well, 9 out of the 10 lepers in our gospel, they did the opposite. They were satisfied with their physical healing. They got what they wanted, and they never returned to our Lord. If we relate this to our lives, leprosy, it's like sin. We all suffer from it. At baptism, we are washed clean of the stain of original sin, and divine life began in us. But sometimes, like the lepers in the gospel, we can settle with that. We can convince ourselves that we're doing good. But it's to the one who remembers God, who returns to our Lord to give him thanks, that Jesus says, "Your faith has saved you," which tells us that there's action required on our part. The Christian life, it isn't just professing the faith or belief in God with our lips and just calling on him in need only, but it's also living the faith. And the question I would say for us today is, how far are we willing to go to follow Christ? It's good that we're all here, but we shouldn't let this be it. We shouldn't just go to Mass on Sunday and then the rest of the week barely think about God. But we should really allow the gospel to infiltrate every aspect of our lives. St. Paul in our second reading said that he's suffering for the gospel, even to the point of chains, like a criminal. And so his life, it wasn't one of mediocrity, but he gave up everything to follow our Lord. Cardinal Bacci, he's an Italian cardinal, and he once said that we cannot be content with half-hearted efforts, but must work hard to become holy. Whoever is satisfied with mediocrity betrays the mission of Christ. He returns ingratitude for his infinite goodness and squanders his divine grace. Well, one way that we could avoid mediocrity in our lives is by not trying to conform our lives to the ways of the world, but conform them to the ways of God. If we're responding to God and his will in our life, he's not going to let us be mediocre. We'll desire to give ourselves more and more until we look like him on the cross. I think one problem that we see today is that people like to think of God as a nice guy. They believe and do things that are contrary to the faith, and they think that God's okay with it. if it makes me feel good and comfortable, or if my beliefs make others comfortable, then it's fine. But Jesus wasn't worried about making people feel good. He challenged us to move from the darkness of sin and ignorance into the light of the truth. He challenges us today, brothers and sisters, to reflect on our beliefs, the values we hold, to determine if they're the ways of the world or if they're the ways of God. There's actually a strange phrase in our second reading. Paul says that if we deny him, he will deny us. If we are unfaithful, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny himself. Peter Kraft, he once commented on this, saying, just as if we accept our Lord, he accepts us. So if we deny him, he'll deny us, not as punishment because he hates us, but because, as the last sentence says, he cannot deny himself. He cannot deny what he himself is, namely unselfish love. If he sees that love in us, he cannot deny that. He cannot say no to our yes. But for the very same reason, he cannot say yes to our no. That would equally be for him to deny himself, to deny what he is, love itself. The way of God, brothers and sisters, is the way of love. It's not the worldly understanding of love, where love's associated with a feeling, and it means to be acceptable of everything, but it's unselfish love, the love Christ displayed for us on the cross. And true love, it really surrenders itself completely to the will of God. It requires self-denial. As Cardinal Bacci said, it requires work to be holy. And we're all called to holiness of life. We're all made for more. But we're also all broken, and we all have struggles in life. And some people's crosses may be easier to carry than others. But kind of going back to what Josemaria Escriva said, we should thank God for everything, because everything's good. The lepers in our gospel, they may not have ever come into contact with Christ if it wasn't for their disease. So everything, it's really an opportunity for us to grow in holiness. When we're faced with trials and difficulties in life, when we struggle with a cross that we'd like to be taken away from us, I think the best course of action is to remember God, constantly respond to his grace, and then strive to live in the truth, to have that unselfish love of Christ so that God can find in us what exists fully in him.